Media Essential Workers, thank you for joining us on this Friday before Labor Day weekend. We're very excited to be joined today by, I got to tell you, I'm a little bit intimidated because the last time we were in an interview room together, Mr. Ed Mann here was interviewing me for a position, as he did a lot of my colleagues at WMAQ in the NBC Tower. There's a little less pressure here. I'm still a little intimidated, but I'm sure this will go fine. Ed Mann, thanks for joining us. This segment, where you been, Ed Mann?
Hey, you're welcome. All I can say is retirement is a good gig, and you don't have to worry about it because there's no committee I have to get you approved before I can hire. So you're good to go.
Sounds good. I'm right where I need to be. But one of the things we want to talk about is the process you took to get to where you eventually got to and the work you did. A lot of people in this industry do similar types of work to get in. You know, I started with a little video camera. I was always interested in it. A lot of colleagues that I talked to did the same. You did something that I think a lot of people can't claim that they've done. You turned the basement of a church into a radio studio. Tell us about that.
When I was in high school, I grew up in suburban New York City, up in Westchester County. And I went to a high school called Hackley in Tarrytown. And it was a private school, a college prep type school. And they had activity clubs for the students. And they were student run, student organized. And there was a gentleman who was a year ahead of me who was interested in creating a radio station. And he started talking to people around campus. And then we got maybe a half dozen of us to begin with. I had never really paid much attention to the radio other than growing up listening to Cousin Brucey on WABC and listening to the 1010 Winds New York, none of which means anything to you. But if anybody in the audience grew up in the 60s listening to radio in New York, they know who I'm talking about. Anyway, we decided, okay, let's start a radio station. So we did. The gentleman whose idea it was got a hold of some used equipment. We got an audio board, we got some mixers, we got an AirSots transmitter, and I had a connection with a New York Telephone, which was run a little differently back in the late 60s than it is probably run now, but they were very accommodating. I could show up with a list of equipment and parts that I wanted on school letterhead, and they said, help yourself. So we got probably several miles worth of cable and connectors and punch down tools and punch down blocks, all courtesy of a New York Telephone. And we put it all together and created what was called a carrier current AM radio station. And in other words, we didn't have a tower and an antenna. We broadcast by connecting to the power grid in the school. And you could pick up the signal on any AM radio.
Is this what I think of when I think that if I touch it, it's coming out of my braces? You can hear the audio. Like I remember
it's similar to that. You know, any electrical wires generate a small level of radiate a small level of signal, and you can modulate that and create at the right frequency and create in effect an AM radio transmitter. So that's what we did. There was a commercial radio station, WQXR 1610 AM, which was the classical music station in New York City, and it just so happened that their signal nulled out a little around campus. So we said, well, here's an open frequency. So
well, even if it didn't allow it certainly would after this little endeavor you guys
would after this. So we borrowed their frequency and started transmitting. And you could pick it up anywhere in school, and it turned out you could pick it up half a mile to a mile off of campus. Luckily, none of the neighbors around ever complained to the FCC. But it was a lot of fun. So we played music in the afternoons. We covered some of the sporting events on the weekends. So this really was my first introduction to radio, at least as a hobby.
So I'm going to
And
ask
it was a lot of fun.
Oh, so you're a high school student. You're taking parts from this New York telephone company. You have an idea what you want to do. You've now kind of figured it out, and you've created something that's actually doing what you thought it would do. Was this surprising? Did you guys always have confidence this would work? What was it like when you tested it and you're hearing it here on your receiver?
I don't think we ever doubted that it would work. I don't think we thought about it that much. We just decided we were going to do it, and whether by luck or by skill, I think is probably more luck than skill. It actually worked the first or second time we tried it, and we said, "Hey, we've got something here. Let's go with it." And as we actually had success and started broadcasting, we got more people in who were interested in being disc jockeys and being sportscasters and being news reporters. So it started to grow.
Were you yourself interested in being on air as either news, or were you always happy to be in the technical aspect?
Never really was interested in that. At one point in my career, I was on air, not at this radio station, but at other radio stations, I was on air. But that really was never my interest. I was a gadget guy. I love to push buttons. I love to flip switches, and see, take things apart and see what makes them work and how they run. And so for me, being a broadcast engineer was ideal.
Well, that's fantastic. And it kind of reminds me of my youth. I would also take things apart. I just wasn't so good at putting them back together, which yeah, exactly. And with my parents' encouragement, it was time for me to go. You also decided at some point, growing up in New York, you had a lot of options available to you. Syracuse University right there, a lot of good colleges, but you decided, maybe a little bit of distance, maybe try my own thing. Is that about right?
Yeah, well, I had 3 members of my family had gone to Syracuse in upstate New York. My brother had gone to another school also in upstate New York. And I decided, I want to go further away. So I looked at schools in Boston, Cleveland, St. Louis, and Chicago. And they, and there was one in New York just in case. I would kind of thought, the farther I get away from home, the better. So it ended up that 3 of the 5 I applied to accepted me. And my first choice, which you and I had talked about, Tufts University in Boston, did not accept me. But Northwestern University in Evanston did. So I had never seen the campus. I had never been to Chicago. One of the alumni who lived in White Plains, New York, near where I grew up, hosted an evening show and tell for high school kids who were applying to Northwestern. So we all trooped over to this gentleman's house. Somebody from the admissions department at Northwestern came in with a slideshow, and they showed us beautiful pictures of the campus and told us about how wonderful Evanston was, and don't worry about the winter. So I kind of liked it. So I said, okay, that's where I'm going. So I did not see Chicago until my parents brought me out here in September of 1971 to go to school here.
If you're just joining us, because it looks like there's an influx of new viewers here, we're talking to Ed Mann. I knew him well as the technical operations manager at WMAQ. He's the gentleman who hired me, so I'll always owe him that debt of gratitude. But we're talking about how he got into that position and kind of the history about everything he accomplished. He's told us how he left New York. He's now in Evanston. However, didn't study anything technically related at that point. Weren't in news. Tell us what you were studying.
Well, like any university, Northwestern has a bunch of schools within the university. I was in the School of Arts and Sciences and had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And at some point, toward the end of your sophomore year, you got to declare a major. And I still, after 2 years there, had no idea what I wanted. So I picked sociology primarily because you didn't have to write a thesis to get your degree, and I thought that was a fine idea. I wasn't into writing thesis.
So pre-planning on how you could be lazy, that is the epitome of.
It is, isn't it? But what I did find out was that there was a campus radio station. They had an FM radio station, WNUR, that broadcast from the basement of Annie Mae Swift, which was a very old building on campus in Evanston, with the transmitter located there and the antenna on the top of this 3-story building. And they were always looking for more people. When I had fun with radio in high school, I said, let's try it. So I walked down there and I said, yeah, I'm interested in being a tech. And they said, we need techs, come on in. So I started spending most of my free time in the basement of Annie Mae Swift, learning how to be a broadcast engineer from somebody who was in the engineering school, who also was into radio. So he was our chief engineer, and I started learning how to work on transmitters. I started learning how to repair audio boards, fix turntables, and at one point I thought about switching to engineering, but my math at the time was not really that strong, so I wasn't going to switch to the School of Engineering. The radio station was really under the School of Speech, and I didn't really foresee getting a degree in media or broadcasting or journalism. So I stayed in sociology, but I spent the vast majority of my time at WNUR. And then the station was always run by the general manager of the station was always a graduate student from the School of Journalism. And there was a woman by the name of Athena Sophias, who was our general manager for the first couple of years I was there. And then she graduated and got a job at an AM/FM station in Evanston, WEAW and WOJO. WEAW was a daytimer. At that time, a lot of radio stations were daytime only. So from local sunrise to local sunset, WEAW was brokered radio. If you paid the money, you got your 15 minutes on the station. WOJO was all Spanish. And we were the board ops for it. And they were looking for technicians to be board ops, and you had to actually be a DJ on the AM side if there was a block of time that wasn't sold. So that was my experience of being a DJ. But Athena called me up and said, "Hey, we're looking for a part-time broadcast engineer, broadcast technician. Are you interested?" And I said, "You mean I can get paid for doing this?" "Sure." So that was where
doing it as a labor of love. Why not? Well,
yeah, it always was something I enjoyed. It never occurred to me I could actually make a living doing this. So when Athena called, I said, "Yes, I'll take it." And that was how I first discovered that you could get paid to do something I really enjoyed doing.
So is that what the bug kind of got you that said, you know what, I think I'm going to follow this career path as opposed to sociology?
Absolutely. When I discovered that someone was actually willing to pay me to do something I was doing for free, that was the path I was going. So I finished up my degree. I got a degree in sociology, which gives you absolutely nothing except the right to go to grad school, and I wasn't interested in that at the time. But I was making a decent living. It was a union station. It was IBEW 1220. We were making a decent wage. So I continued working there through when I graduated from Northwestern in 1975.
Ed, I understand this is also kind of what fostered your interest in labor, in the union movement as well. I know that you wanted to be on the contract negotiating committee. Whether or not it was available to you was something that you wanted to at least get involved in. Is that about
where
you started that interest?
The contract at WEAW expired once during the time I was there. So there were a handful of us on staff. Either full or part-time, and we got together with the gentleman who was the union business manager at the time, and we went over changes we'd like to see in the contract. And this is where I first started to learn about union contracts and negotiating, and what labor wants versus what management wants, and what you can actually reasonably expect to get. So I went through, I think, only one contract negotiation there. It was an interesting learning experience. I'd never done anything like that before, but it got me interested in what the union can do for you. And I could see firsthand that we were much better off being members of 1220 than we would be if we were not.
So you completed your time at this station. You then went on to what's now known as WLUP. It was WSDM at that time. What were they known for at that time?
Well, WEAW, WOJO did not have any full-time positions. So when I graduated, I needed a full-time job. So I started checking with radio stations downtown. And WSDM was, that stood for smack dab in the middle. They were right in the middle of the FM dial. And they were known for the station with the girls. Every disc jockey on the station was a woman. And they were jazzed up rock, if I remember the format correctly. But they overnight, instead of a live disc jockey, they had a very rudimentary automation system. So they needed an engineer to babysit that overnight and to do commercial production, dubbing music, dubbing commercials, a little light maintenance. Maintenance really wasn't the high point of that job. But there was just one other engineer, their chief engineer. So I would help him if there was something big he was working on.
I'm going to jump in here because I understand there were certain perks to this job. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this was the station that was owned by the Chess family. Is that correct?
Correct.
So paint the landscape. What were they known for, and what were some of the perks of working there that I wish more places offered?
The Chess family was primarily known for having a recording studio in Chicago. Chess Records was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, label for Chicago home musicians, primarily blues and jazz. And they had a lot of famous musicians were on Chess Records, and brothers Leonard and Phil ran it when I was there, and WSDM was run by Leonard. I don't really know ownership wise how Chess came to own WSDM, but they did it at the time. So like any radio station, they got freebie LPs from the record companies. You got promotional copies with the hole punched in the album, so it wasn't for sale. But they got hundreds and hundreds, thousands probably of records in almost any genre. A lot of rock, but also because they were Chess Records, there was a lot of classic blues and jazz floating around. And being the overnight engineer, I had time to go shopping. So I accumulated a lot of duplicates that they did not need and weren't interested in keeping anymore. At one point, when I moved apartments, I had well over 600 albums that I had to figure out how to move and store.
It reminds me a little bit of Chuck Quinzio's book. He's got that book, Life Behind the Lens, where he got his first radio job too. And one of the perks, what was some of the stuff that you had access to that they would let you have. So you must have been like a kid in a candy store at this point. You're getting paid. You have access to this. Sounds like they were a pretty good family to work for.
It wasn't bad. They not my management style. Leonard could be a challenge to work for. They were also at IBW 1220 station. A lot of the small radio stations were at the time. I lost track, to tell you the truth, if they still are. But at the time, in the early to mid 70s, 1220 had a lot of the local radio stations. I did not go through contract negotiations with Leonard when I was there, but it was a union job. I got union scale, and all was good.
Well, Ed, now you kind of get into some of the stuff I know a little bit about, and I know a lot of our listeners are in broadcast television. I kind of want to paint a picture because some of us may not be familiar with what the landscape was in Chicago in radio back then. So let's paint a picture, because your next stop was at WMAQ radio, but on the FM side, correct?
Both. It was both AM and FM.
Okay, so I want to paint the picture of, tell me about trucker radio. Some of our audience might be familiar with it, some might not be. Now, this was a radio station that basically hit 38 states and part of Canada under, there it is, look at that shirt.
There it is, your radio station. This was from last year's reunion. But yeah, the AM station, WMAQ 670, was country music. And at the time, it was a clear channel station, which meant the daytime stations had to shut down at local sunset. We were the only station broadcasting on that frequency, other than some small station in Idaho who pointed west, so they didn't interfere with us. But we covered, as you said, 38 states and most of Canada. So almost anywhere in North America, in the evening, you could hear WMAQ Chicago. And Fred Sanders was the overnight truckers host, and the format was the same, other than Fred used to take a lot of calls from truckers who were on the road. But it was a huge audience at the time, and it was a big thing to work for a clear channel station.
So I understand with the recipe of country music, weather, and prizes, including what at one time was a $100,000 new truck, he was able to command quite an audience of truckers and other people with interest in just hearing the country music. What was it like to a powerhouse like this to be able to go there?
It was, for me, it was very exciting. First of all, it's a major radio station, WMAQ, and at the time WNIS was it was NBC. It goes back to 1926. You're in the Merchandise Mart, which is essentially where they were from almost 1926. A lot of the old radio studios were still there if you knew where to look. Offices that were areas that were currently offices in the mid to late 70s. You go back 40 years, they were all radio studios, and it was just fascinating to walk around to see the history. And as a kind of a history buff and a radio buff, for me, it was really thrilling and exciting to be a part of this. I was very excited.
Ed, let's share the experience. I'm going to have Sarah punch up some pictures of the 19th and 20th floor of the Merchandise Mart. Kind of walk us through, for people who have only heard, like my generation of photographers have heard about the Merchandise Mart and the work that was done there, have never had the experience of going through there. So we're going to punch up, Ed Dabrowski was actually nice enough to provide us with some floor plans. So kind of walk us through some of this. Or if you punch up the 19th floor, let's take a look at what young Ed Mann was walking through. Tell me what this experience was like in 3 dimensions.
As I think Jimmy Mack told you a couple weeks ago, the Merchandise Mart, when it was built, was the largest office building. This predated the Pentagon. So before the Pentagon was built, this was the largest office building. So this is the 19th floor, which covered an enormous area. If you look at that gray area in the middle, and just below that, right there, where you see Studio G, Studio H, and Studio J, those were the radio studios. G was WNIS, the News and Information Studio, a news and information station. H was WMAQ Radio, and J, the left-hand side of that's not marked, was news editing. The newsroom was right across the hall from that. Where it actually says Studio J was later became an automation area when we switched from news to music. But at the time, that area was a radio recording area.
So now you're walking in on the 19th floor of what was a powerhouse that everyone knew about. This is the line of work you want to get into. Tell me about the people that you encountered there, and tell me about the opportunities that you came to know were available to you.
Well, at the time, if you were a broadcast engineer, first of all, I had to join NABET. They were not IBEW, they were NABET. And second, nobody's hired full-time off the street. Everybody came in as what was called a vacation relief engineer. The staff engineers would take vacations, would pick their vacations between April and October on a calendar, just very similar to the way it's done now. And the company would hire vacation relief engineers to cover the slots of the people who were on vacation. So when I came in, just like anybody else, I signed a contract saying I understood I was a temporary employee. I would work 40 hours a week, but only from April through October. And said, okay, I'll give this a shot. Why not? And I did, and that's how I got in. At the end of that time, the company said, well, we'd like to keep you, but we can't hire you full time. What they could do, we had one engineer, his name was Dan Hozak. Dan was the ghost. He was the sports remote engineer. So at the time, WMAQ broadcast both the Chicago White Sox and the Chicago Blackhawks. So Dan was on the road doing Blackhawks games and White Sox games for most of the year. And when neither team was playing is when he took his vacations. So because Dan was on the road, they needed somebody to backfill him in the studio. So they created the position of hockey relief engineer for the winter of 76, 77, and then baseball relief engineer for the summer of 77. So I, instead of just being there for 6 months, I was there for 18 months as a temporary employee, which was the limit on what the NAVEC contract would permit. But it was just a great experience to meet the people, work with the disc jockeys. Joel Sebastian on the radio side was a very famous broadcast engineer, broadcast announcer. As we said, Fred overnights. The whole team. Ellie Dillon was a very famous woman who was our afternoon disc jockey, and the FM side was all news. So they had a fairly busy operation with after reporters and NAVEC engineers going out to cover and edit news for local and national stories.
So at this point, are you working for the AM or the FM? Because I know at this very soon after they started an all information FM side.
Yes, we were both. It was just radio. Depending, the stations were operated jointly, same staff, and just depended where they needed you that day. I mean, the staff engineers had regular shifts, and they typically worked for one or the other, but you could go back and forth. As a vacation relief engineer, I got plugged in to fill whatever hole was there. So sometimes I'd work AM, sometimes I'd work FM, sometimes I'd work radio recording. It just depended what needed to be done.
So I'm assuming not only were you able to meet a lot of different people working different shifts, but do a lot of different work. What were some of the highlights of that time? What were some of the things you found difficult? What were some of the learning experiences?
Well, one of the first times in radio recording, we did all the board operations. So the disc jockeys and the reporters just sat in front of the mic and talked. We pressed all the buttons. We turned their mics on and off. We ran the records. We played the commercials. We made all the switching between local and network. So my experience as a board op came in very handy. In radio recording, we made a lot of commercial dubs. We made a lot of program dubs because of NAVEC jurisdiction. We could not. I should say the station could not air a tape that came in from outside. The union had to dub it to one of our reels. So anytime a program tape came in, or any kind of a commercial tape or anything, we had to dub it. So that was a NAVEC job. So the recording room did all of that. And one of the first weeks I was there, they had a quarter-inch audio tape machine rack up in the racks, so it was vertically mounted with metal reels. Sometimes the audio recordings came on plastic reels, and sometimes they came on metal reels. This one happened to have a metal reel, and we were trying to find something, a cut that management wanted to hear. So the chief engineer came in, and a couple of the salespeople came in, and they're trying to find this cut. And I'm auditioning for it, so I'm going through the tape quickly, shuttling it back and forth, trying to find the cut. And the easiest way when you're shuttling tape to slow it down is put your hand on the reel to slow the reel down. And I had my hand too close to the edge of this metal reel, and I sliced a bit of my finger. Nothing major other than I'm bleeding. And I'm trying to hide the blood and be very cool because the chief engineer is right there, and he's watching me. So I kind of reach over and I grab like a paper napkin. I just hold it in my hand to try to hide what had happened. And I have no idea. They never said anything, so I have no idea whether they actually saw what I did. But it was kind of embarrassing for me to slice my finger when I'm trying to show the chief engineer what a good engineer I am.
You know, I'm curious because certain things like this end up being more common than you think. Like, which photographer hasn't maybe hurt himself on a hot light again? And oh, I don't want anyone else to see. In talking with other coworkers, does it turn out to be something that's more likely to be common than, or was it something you never talked to anyone about?
You know, you have a few beers, and who knows what'll come up in the conversation. I think all of us have done stupid things somewhere along the line. Thank goodness most of the time it's with a small audience. Sometimes the story gets out. I think most of the time it doesn't. One of the fun things about working in radio was it really was a small family, and it was not unusual to come in an hour or two before your shift or to stay an hour or two after your shift just to BS with everybody. Or, you know, when the shift's over late at night, there were a couple of restaurants, all-night restaurants on the north side, and we'd go have a you know, an early breakfast, a late dinner or something, and a few drinks, and just enjoy each other's company. It was a lot of fun.
Well, you know what else is interesting, and I want to point this out now because you were on the radio side, so we can establish you had nothing to do with this, but it's not only the individuals who sometimes do things that can be a little bit of a blooper or embarrassing, like, for instance, cutting your hand, but the networks themselves that can kind of learn as they go. And I'm leading into the Heidi game. And for people, some people might know what this is, some people might not. So with some video that we have garnered from KTO, thanks for putting that together. Why don't we play that? Why don't we give an example of what this mess up was, and then Ed, walk us through what exactly we're watching. Sarah, if you could punch that video.
Monica to Charlie.
What was that, Ed? I wanted to see how that ended.
I'll tell you right now, it was not as smooth as what you just saw.
That's a dramatization, and I understand that some people were upset about that. This is some many years after the fact, and I still want to know how that goes. What happened?
This was one of the lowlights, I guess you would say, of WMAQ history. This happened in November of 1968. It was the Oakland Raiders hosting the New York Jets. This was the American Football League before the AFL and the NFL merged. And this predates satellites. The television network was distributed via a coaxial cable run through AT&T central offices. The way the television network was configured, there was a cable that went north from New York through Cleveland to Chicago. There was another cable that went south from Chicago through Washington, D.C., and then back up to New York. So it could make a loop, and either Chicago or New York could control the network, or Washington. Washington could break in. The line between Chicago and San Francisco was a single line. It either went west or it went east. And then it was distributed up to Seattle and down to Los Angeles from San Francisco. The line, the PC line, Pacific Coast line, was controlled, as they all did. They were controlled through a series of telephone company central offices, and Chicago had the control to reverse the PC.
So somewhere in all this intricate technology, something goes wrong. There's a break in communication. There's a directive. From what I understand, sports, that football game was supposed to have ended, and there was a commitment between the NBC network and the production company for Heidi that this thing was supposed to start at a certain time. But with all these loops, something went loopy. What happened?
Well, what happened was the time the movie was supposed to start was family time. Sports was supposed to be done, and NBC Network was supposed to be doing family shows. So the week before, some football game, and I don't remember which one, had run over, and the movie either started late or they joined it in progress. And the network decided this could not happen again.
I understand the Dodgers agent was furious.
Yeah. So Julian Goodman, who was president of NBC at the time, dictated that come hell or high water, Heidi would start on time. So the football game was coming out of the West Coast. So the PC line was going west to east through Chicago, and then we fed the eastern half of the U.S. We went down through Washington, and the loop was closed in New York, and it came back to us, and we opened the loop so you didn't get feedback. But that was all. The game was going from west to east. At the time Heidi was supposed to start, we were under orders from New York to start the movie on time. The movie was coming out of New York, so Chicago had to release control of the network and give it to New York. So we reversed the PC, so it was going east to west now, and that was about a 30-second process to get all these AT&T central offices to reverse the polarity on the relays. And then we closed the loop coming from New York so that it would feed back to Washington and the whole country would get New York's feed. And New York was supposed to open the loop to feed the movie. So we did what we were supposed to do and gave it to New York. New York, about that time, the game had gone into overtime, or it was tied game. It was a huge. The game was nowhere near being done, and Julian Goodman realized what was going to happen and called New York and said, delay the movie. Well, it was all well and good calling New York, but New York didn't control the network. Chicago controlled the network, and nobody told us. And I started that I was not there. I heard this from one of the NABET operations directors who was still working there at NBC when I went from radio to television. And Paul Malzone told me the story. Paul was there. So Chicago gave control back to New York. New York tried to get Chicago to take the control back, and we wouldn't do it because that wasn't what our orders were. So there was some video feedback for a while in half the country until New York finally realized we weren't going to take it back, and they started the movie. At some point, they tried to call us, but by that time, there were so many phone calls into the New York switchboard, the switchboard blew up. So New York could not call Chicago to tell us to keep the football game going. So after a lot more than what you just saw, the movie started. There was a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking about this, but from everything I heard from Paul, there were no ramifications to anybody in Chicago because we were following Mr. Goodman's instructions, and nobody told us otherwise.
And just to clarify for people who don't remember this, after this whole debacle, sometime during when the movie's playing, so all the sports people have stopped watching this, they decide during one of a very touching scene to pop up the score too. So
Yes.
the legacy continues.
And there were no lower thirds at the time. You just covered the whole screen.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is some of the TV history that, again, I didn't even know about until we were talking. I just kind of had to look it up and be like, you know what, we got to share this, because this is one of those things that we don't know WMAQ and NBC, and it's really changed kind of the way these things have happened. I mean, it's changed policy since.
Yep, absolutely, and it, you know, coming from when I went from radio to television, and walking into the control room that did the Heidi switch, with some of the people who made that switch, it was just it was amazing that it was living history.
That's hilarious. Just another story from this. From what I've heard at the time, the Mets were up, and one of the players ended up flying home the next day. His father picked him up and said, "Hey, why are you so glum?" Because when the switchover happened, nobody knew that another 2 touchdowns were scored by the other team. So
correct. Yeah, there was the game went the opposite of what it was at the point when we cut it off, and only the people on the West Coast saw the whole game. Nobody east of San Francisco saw the whole game.
Both Bud Ream and Jimmy Mack joining us now. Bud Ream saying 6 p.m. Heidi. I guess that's what it was.
Yep.
Had come to be known as. Let's talk about. So we talked about some of the glitches that can happen, but let's talk about some of the heroic moments when you guys have to make some quick decisions, get some things done fast. If you watch the show regularly, you've never seen this sitting here. And so I'm going to explain to you what this is. This was a memorabilia I got when I was covering a press conference. I believe it was some anniversary of a tirade that Lee Elia went on. If you don't know what it sounds like, let's listen to the censored version that I have right here.
Players get destroyed every day and be quiet about it. For the nickel dime people that show up, the don't even work. They want to go out and get a job and find out what it's like to go out there and live. 85% of the world's working. The other 15 come out here. That clip.
So this was more colorfully stated in the original. And there was one microphone, an Associated Press reporter's microphone at the time, that caught this. This audio, I'm sure, I wasn't there, but I'm sure was very virally distributed in what was viral at the time to all the media outlets. There was quick turnarounds. Ed, what'd you do?
Well, I was in news editing that day, and this tape comes in, and we're trying to sit here, trying to figure out how we can air this thing without violating the 7 words that you can't say on radio. So we went for a different technique than what you just heard. I was pretty good at the time. It was razor blade editing with audio tape. You had the 1/4-inch audio tape, and you sliced your razor blade, and you move tape around, and you take sections out, and I could edit breaths out of somebody's speech. So I decided, you know what? Let's take every swear word, slice it, and flip it over. So the word was still there, but it was backwards.
Huh.
So I took Lee's speech, and I reversed every curse word in it, and we aired it that way. And it was, hey, yeah, kind of knew what he was saying, but he never said it. It was a lot of fun.
Well, and from what I've heard, because of the quick turnaround you got and the creative thinking, you got a lot of props in the newsroom that day for deciding this is what you were going to do.
Yes, it was a big hit. I think a lot of people, both on the NABIT side and the after side, thought this was a marvelous thing, that we could air this without the beeps and still not violate any FCC rules and regs.
This now gets into a time when I'm a little bit more familiar with. I think a lot of people who worked in this industry are familiar with this point. RCA, NBC is bought out from RCA, where NBC was really viewed as the crown gem, correct? It was almost an untouchable enterprise that was dedicated to public service, to the public trust, and news is not going to be touched, to Jack Welch and General Electric.
when we were owned by RCA, as you said, we were the crown jewel. We got a lot of technology. We were a big wheel in the organization. We got a lot of support from the company. It was very nice. In '86, I think it was, GE bought RCA. They wanted RCA's defense work. They had no interest in NBC, but we came along for the ride. Rumors started to fly about what GE was going to do with NBC, and specifically NBC Radio. Nobody knew what was going to go on. We had no facts, so in the vacuum of no facts, rumors flew. About that time, the company decided that they would transfer, well, I think it was 5 of the NABIT radio engineers over to television. We were a common seniority list. Radio and TV was on one master seniority list. They decided, well, they were getting some,
correct.
I'm sorry?
Same seniority and same pay tier as well, right? So it would be a
correct. Yeah, it was one contract. If you were Group 2 in radio or Group 2 in television, you got the same pay. I think they had some retirements about that time in the mid '80s, and so they needed some people. They decided, okay, we'll transfer 5 people out of radio. I raised my hand, and I was one of the 5 who were chosen. So they took us over to the television side. I'd walked around the television side. I knew what went over there, but I hadn't really worked on that side. And they gave us to a gentleman by the name of John Wayne. John was the senior video engineer on the television side. And of course, because he was John Wayne, the same name as the actor, we called him the Duke. And the Duke knew more about television than he forgot more about television than anybody knows. The Duke was a very wise person, both in terms of television and in terms of just life philosophy. So the first thing he told us was, you're on the television side now, 13-inch video picture, 3-inch audio speaker. That's the priority. So we went, okay, forget everything we knew about radio. This is pictures now. And John walked us through the entire process. He drew out the television broadcast signal, explained how at the time the analog blanking was done and what every portion of the signal did, and we went from there. We learned all about the television engineering, and then we started getting the television operations. We kind of rotated around different departments, and eventually I ended up in what we called big tape. It was the videotape room, which on that map Ed Dabrowski gave you was on the bottom left. And at the time, it was still running 2-inch videotape. We had a couple of 1-inch machines, but we were primarily 2-inch videotape. And you really needed to know the broadcast signal, because you had to set up these 2-inch machines looking at an electronic oscilloscope to balance the signal and get the pictures to work. Was it
overwhelming? Was it exciting? It
was exciting. It was, as I said, I love to push buttons and flip switches. So this was a whole new area. I had done just about all there was to do in radio. I was a weekend supervisor over there. I'd run board on both AM and FM. I did the automation. That is let me think now. I think that's Studio J control room, if I remember right.
All right.
Oh no, you know what? I think that's Studio D. That's over in the television side. I think that's Studio D control. But as I said, I'd done about all I could do on the radio side, including supervisory work, and moving up to Group 5 instead of Group 2. That's nice.
Pay raises wasn't.
And the pay raises are always good, even if it was only for 2 days a week. And so as I worked over on the television side and videotape, again, we had to dub all these commercials. All the commercials would all come in on 1-inch tape because that was the current thing at the time. But we were still using 2-inch, so you had to dub them to what we call these little red boxes. They were video cassette boxes that would hold, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes worth of videotape. And you put one commercial on every box. And then, so I spent a couple years making little red boxes from commercial reels. And then again, I ended up on the weekends being the tape room supervisor. And went on from there. Eventually, I started moving over to master control, which was.
Tell me about that, because now these buttons you're pushing and these switches you're pushing are moving satellites, and you're controlling things that are bouncing and coming from outer space. Tell me about that. Yeah. That I'm interested in.
Master control at the Mart controlled our transmitters, which at the time were on top of the John Hancock Center. And we had dishes on the roof of the merchandise mart, satellite dishes, and we had satellite dishes at a location out in Des Plaines, Illinois, which was 15 miles northwest of the loop, which was actually an old RCA warehouse that they had sold to the Cloud Corporation, if I remember correctly, and they were using it as a warehouse, but we kept the footprint of where the satellite dishes were. So we had 3 or 4 satellite dishes out there and a couple of small brick buildings to support them. And then a microwave signal. We had a microwave tower that was, as I recall, only 80 feet because it was right under O'Hare.
Ed, I gotta ask you this. I'm just gonna take a step back and just ask you, ever get any crazy signals that you weren't expecting? Like anything from deep space or anything just that wasn't expected that came through?
No, they did have, at the time, I don't remember if you ever heard about Max Headroom.
Yeah.
Yes. We were never hit by Max. I think, as I recall, we were never hit by Max. There are a couple other stations were hit by Max Headroom. We all had STL, studio transmitter links, which were microwaves that went from studios up to the transmitters, either at Hancock or later at Sears. And whoever Max Headroom was overpowered the STL on those stations' frequencies and broadcast his own programming. It made quite a stir at the time. But as I said, I don't think we ever were hit by Max.
Hey, you got some endorsement deals, I believe, after that, right? Wasn't he, if I'm not mistaken,
I think,
a soda spokesperson for a while? And what else?
Yeah. There was, as I recall, there was a soda commercial that used Max Headroom. so
now, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ed.
No, I was going to say I don't believe they ever identified who was behind that.
Huh.
If they did, I do not know that, but it was it was interesting.
I believe he hit WGN, WTTW. So a couple of stations. You go on YouTube, and you can see some of the clips we're talking about. And actually, I'd be remiss. I do want to, for anyone who's watching, point out that some of the resources that when I talked to Ed that I researched, and if you're interested, you should check it out as well, is scottchilders.com and richsamuels.com. If you kind of want to take a stroll down memory lane or see what it is we're talking about, be able to visualize it, those are 2 good resources I found. I'll actually give those to Sarah so she can maybe punch them up. But you're familiar with those as well, aren't you, Ed? Those websites?
Yes. I don't know the first one as well, but Rich Samuels has quite a collection of memorabilia online. And it's very well organized. A lot of clips, a lot of pictures. Rich has done a tremendous job supplying that stuff, and it's fun to see.
So as you're learning more about the new technology, the technology of television, as you're increasing your skill set, you're also put in a position where you're learning more about labor, and you're learning more about labor management kind of relationships. Tell us what happened shortly after you go over the side.
I had started getting active in NABET not too long after I was hired full time. I was alternate steward in radio for a while under Mike Pratt's, and then I continued as either alternate steward or steward on the television side for a while, off and on, at a videotape. back in, what was it, 87, I think?
Yeah, 87.
The NABEC contract had been expired for a year or so, and we weren't getting anywhere negotiating with GE. GE was always take it or leave it. They were not much for actually negotiating. And we decided we'd leave it. So we went out on strike in 87. We were out for 16 weeks and eventually settled. And then the company said, screw you, we're keeping you out for another week just because we can. So we were actually out 17 weeks, the last week of which was a lockout. But as with any strike situation, nobody really wants to be there. You know, we didn't want to be on picket duty. The reporters didn't want to have to work with the managers who were doing our jobs, and the managers didn't really want to do our jobs. And Chicago.
And kind of tell me what that was like then. So you have managers, you probably have administrative personnel going out with equipment. Kind of walk all of us through what that was like. What it was like on a day-to-day basis in terms of how news was covered, in terms of what you guys had to deal with. Because again, we got to remind people, these are your coworkers. These are not NABET members, but people you see every day. So you got to get your point across. But you still know these people, so that
well, you still know these people, and when all is said and done, and the settlement is reached, we got to go back and work with them again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chicago was not the controlling factor in these negotiations. You know, New York and Burbank pretty much decide what's going on, and the other cities, you know, Chicago, Cleveland at the time, San Francisco, Washington D.C., and wherever else we had radio and TV stations. Together, we did not outweigh New York and Burbank, so we went along for the ride. But we had a point to make. We were fighting for our jobs, for our livelihood. So the strike comes, and you're assigned picket duty. You're assigned, you know, you work at one of the doors of the mart. You work at the loading dock of the mart. As Jimmy Mack told you, the minicam shop was at the far east end of the loading dock of the merchandise mart. So you had to negotiate all the truckers to get the minicam trucks in and out. And so we set up a picket line in front of the loading dock. It was fascinating to me, the solidarity we got from the truckers. Almost every single trucker was a Teamster. And every one of them would stop and ask who we were picketing, because they were not going to cross our line if we were picketing whoever they were delivering to. And we said, nope, we're picketing NBC. As long as you are not delivering for NBC, you're welcome to come in and drop off whatever furniture you're dropping off for the merchandise mart. But we were very impressed that there was a lot of union solidarity among the other trades, who wanted to know, who wanted to make sure they weren't crossing any lines they didn't want to cross. The other jobs we had was to try to get the word out to the general public that the boycott NBC. NBC workers are on strike. Don't watch NBC. Hurt their ratings. Hurt the advertisers. And help us win a better contract.
But how are you going to get this message out, right? You work in a visual trade. Right. I'm trying to brainstorm how you might go about letting people know not to watch Channel 5 at this time.
Well, when they have reporters who are out covering the news, and the camera people are either office clerical people or managers who are doing our job, the object is to get behind the reporter in the shot with your "I'm on strike" sign, and make sure that they can't get a clean shot of the reporter without a NABET sign in the picture. So we would monitor the radio. A lot of the guys were still radio dispatched, so we of course knew all the frequencies. We could monitor the radios from the newsroom. We could monitor the PL and listen to them producing the newscasts and know what was going on and know where people were going. So we could make sure we were there when some manager showed up with a camera on his shoulder, and we could get in the shot. I was often assigned on that duty, and one particular one, I forgot why we were at it. We were at O'Hare Airport, and I can't remember why. I seem to remember it's where O'Hare has terminals 1, 2, 3, and 5. There's no terminal 4. Terminal 4 is the steam plant that at some point was supposed to go away, and terminal 4 would be built there, and it never was. So as I recall, there was some big development at the steam plant, and they were covering that. And by golly, I got in every shot. They could not get a clean shot of the reporter. And I can't for the life of me remember. It might have been Paul Hogan, but I can't remember who the reporter was at the time. But they could not get a clean shot without me there holding a sign up. So strike.
What you told me next really fascinated me, because from my time at NBC, you were always my manager. That's the perspective I knew you at. You had hired me. You had hired a lot of the colleagues that I come up with. But what I was like, wow, I give him some street cred, is that during this whole process, you were served with a restraining order. You were so effective at getting this message out that the company's like, we have got to stop this. What happened? How did that happen?
I was not the only one. There were a handful of us who were too good at this, and the company went to court and got a restraining order to prevent us from holding up our strike signs in the back of their shots. But they didn't get a blanket restraining order. They named us. So the answer was, okay, I go back to picketing on the street, and somebody else chases the camera people. And so they went to the process of getting the restraining orders, but I don't think it accomplished what they were trying to accomplish. And of course, by the time it goes through the courts, we're most of the way through the 17 weeks.
What was the mood like? I've talked to a lot of people. I've never had to go through one of these myself. You're going out probably for the first time on a strike. There's a lot of uncertainty. Just kind of talk to maybe some of the people who haven't done it about what it's like with your coworkers, what it's like mentally. Walk us through the.
You have to remember that most of our coworkers, other than the executive management, most of our coworkers had sympathy for us because a lot of them were either IATSE or AFTRA members themselves. So they were very supportive. I know Ron Majors and Carol Marine would come out with coffee and donuts for us when we were picketing. We were always very friendly and very respectful of them and thankful for their support. And that was the general rule. Company management, not so much. When we finally came back after the 1 week lockout, they brought us all into Studio A, which was the biggest studio on the television side, and sat us down and basically let us know that they weren't terribly happy about us coming back, but here we were. The settlement was made with New York, and we're back. But they referred to us several times as the enemy, and we did not like that. And so the feelings between NABET and some of the upper management took several years to cool off. It was not a great experience. It was, you never make up the money you lose. Most of us ended up getting part-time jobs somewhere to support ourselves and our families. Whether you could get unemployment or not varied from state to state, and I don't believe Illinois at the time allowed it. I could be wrong on that, but I don't think they did. So a lot of us got part-time jobs somewhere. Sometimes it was in broadcasting. Sometimes it was, at a hardware store or wherever you could find work. So you're divvying up time between trying to still earn money and your responsibility to your NABET brothers and sisters picketing. So it's a very stressful time for everybody involved, no matter which side of the equation you're on.
Ed, you still proudly carry a card that you showed me right before the show. If you still got that around, kind of pull it up. Let it.
Grab that again. When I crossed over to the dark side, I still have my NABET card.
And you're still a member.
I was a member through December 31st of 2003, and then I withdrew. So technically, I'm probably still on the NABET books. I had a quote unquote temporary withdrawal from Local 41.
So let me ask you this. This is fascinating to me as someone who owned a company myself. One of the things that they tell you is as an owner, as a manager, it's difficult to be friends with, if not impossible, people that you have to manage. Now, you stood shoulder to shoulder, side by side with your coworkers in probably what was one of the worst moments of your life. You've built that relationship with them. At some point now, like you said, you're crossing over. Tell us, first of all, how that offer was made, and then the challenges of going from NABET to management.
Well, the good news is that at the time, the broadcast operations and engineering department had a very strong tradition of engineering managers coming out of NABET. They felt that you had earned years and years and years of experience. You knew the people, you knew the equipment, you knew the plant. So most of the technical managers came out of NABET. When I learned from Rick Hessel, who was a manager, who was two managers before me, and then Tom Schnecke was the previous manager for broadcast for technical operations. And he left to go become chief engineer at WCBS. I'm sorry, WBBM, CBS television station. And when he left, I applied for the job. I actually applied. Oh, you know what? I forgot Ken Harvey. Ken Harvey was in between Rick Hessel and Tom Schnecke. I had applied when Ken got that job. Was not hired for management, so I stayed in NABET. Was not hired when Tommy got the job, but I honestly don't remember applying for that at the time. And then when Tommy left, I applied for the job, and Jan Golden, who was the director of broadcast operations and later VP of broadcast operations, hired me. And my background had been videotape, transmission, master control, Studio B, doing some TV work. I had never really worked in news editing, what we used to call tiny tape, EJ. And I had never really worked I had done some field work in radio, but never really worked in television field. And they said Ken Jackson was technical operations manager for maintenance and engineering development. And what I was supposed to do was run the other side. I was supposed to run transmission and the news field operation and news editing, none of which I had a lot of direct experience with, but I knew most of the guys and I knew what was going on. And I went, okay, I can do this. So it was an interesting transition, but I think having been in NABET 25 years by that point, I think I had the confidence of the people I was suddenly managing, and I had their support because, as I said, the company had a long history of promoting NABET supervisors into management. So that helped a lot, and I relied on the guys to teach me what I needed to know. Rick Hessel graciously came back and helped me with several projects, so I could get my feet under me, and I came to rely on several key people in Minicam to help reorganize the shop and to get the field operation running on a nice, smooth keel, nice even keel.
Ed, so I'm gonna take kind of a step back and talk about our current circumstances, situations. Obviously, there's a lot of live event workers who are really rooting for because they've been put out of work. A lot of people in IATSE, a lot of people in all sorts of live events since the beginning of this pandemic. They were the first ones that were put out of work. They're likely going to be the first or the last people who come back. You worked as operations manager side by side and very closely with a lot of these people on a lot of different projects. We're talking about the Chicago Marathon. We're talking about the auto show. We're talking about sporting events. I mean, you really came to draw on a lot of these people, their expertise, collaborate with them. Kind of tell us about some of that. Tell us about, you go from the NABIT side to now supervising and gosh, what should I ask? Marathon?
One of my first projects was we had the contract to do the Chicago Bears preseason games. So we had 4 preseason games to do, 2 home and 2 away. And at that year, they were rebuilding Soldier Field. So the Bears were playing down at U of I Champaign.
I was in Champaign at the time.
So suddenly I'm the manager who has to get these games on the air. And I'm going, okay, now what? This is where Rick Hessel, one of my predecessors, was just key in helping me understand what it is I had to do. So we went down to U of I, we did some site surveys, we went to the 2 away cities to look at the stadiums there and to figure out where we're going to put cameras and where the trucks were going to park. But Jan Golden was very supportive of using our people wherever we could. There were obviously freelancers available to do a lot of this work. There was a company called Program Productions who does a tremendous amount of this field sporting staff's field sporting events, and they're still probably one of the largest in the country. Wonderful organization, great people, but we wanted to use our own. We felt we had wonderful people on staff in Minicam. And, you know, while run and gun news is a lot of fun, they'd probably want to do something different. They'd probably want to do a football game or a hockey game or a parade or a celebration or something. So we tried to staff our own people wherever we could. So it was a mixture of getting outside NABIT freelancers for some positions and filling as much as we could with our people. I think I sent you some pictures of Mike McGovern and Bill Jennings with their motorcycle helmets on for the Chicago Marathon. There we go.
Yep.
The upper left is Dave and I getting ready for the G7 summit in Chicago. We were issued helmets, so we were trying the helmets on. Mike McGovern in the middle was one of our motorcycle shooters for the marathon. Billy Jennings on the right was another one, and that group on the bottom left was the production crew for one of the marathons. And it was, as I said, we tried to use our people as much as we could. Filled it in with other NABIT freelancers where it was available or where they had specialized gear that we didn't have access to. But it was a lot of fun planning these events, and I worked very closely with our own shop staff to figure out how we could produce these, how we could make what the news department had come to life, and make the best use of the people we had and give them something different to do.
So what was the hardest part about trying to do all that? About coordinating all this, about now you're doing these live events that are, a couple of hours, require a lot of personnel. This is really true management at its finest, probably the most stressful.
As you know, live television waits for no man. When the clock says you go, whether you're ready or not. So a lot of what I was very good at was logistics, figuring out what we needed and doing planning. And it's not just plan A, you need plan B and C. When the generator powering the remote truck dies, you have to have another generator there to pick up the signal again. You can't take the time to try to get that first one working again. And that happened during I think one of our marathons. The generator died.
What Jimmy was telling me about another way that you were an expert planner was just in terms of the catering and just in terms of making sure that crews were properly fed. And he told me that these were somehow like 5-star rated foods that you didn't skimp. How did you put all that together?
I always liked to take care of the crew. I felt it was important. You know, I'd been on crews, and I always felt it was important to take care of the guys as much as I could. And you know, if I'm asking them to be out there for 15 hours a day, the least I can do is make sure that they're fed and watered as adequately as possible. And the nice thing was, I had 2 credit cards from the company. One was a travel card, and one was a purchase card, P card. And I had one of only 3 P cards in the whole company. That they decided that they were going to restrict spending by limiting the number of P cards. So all that meant was I had to buy for a whole host of people, because I was one of the 3 people with a P card. What that also meant was when I was going out to cater events, I'd work with the producers to make sure that that food was adequately supplied. Although sometimes it wasn't exactly as I had hoped it would be. There were a couple of times where the sandwiches were a little skimpy, but for most of the time, I think it did a good job. But I could put all this stuff on my P card, and there was so much volume on the P card that the company couldn't itemize it all, and it helped. It helped when I wanted to make sure that the guys were taken care of and they had the food and the equipment they needed.
Sarah, as the producer, I want to ask you, as somebody who watches television, who wants to know some of the magic behind it, what are some of the questions you have about some of these live events like the auto show that I know you and the kids are very fond of? What are some of the questions about how these things are put on that you have? And one of the other things I'll quickly mention, I do want to get another story that Jimmy Mack told me, is a lot of these things like the marathon, the auto show, you kind of do the same way every time. But what was very different was NATO, was the summit, right?
Yes.
You didn't know how many radios you needed. You didn't know how you were going to communicate particularly. How did you work with other branches of NBC to make sure that you had what you and the crews needed to make a flawless production?
One of the things as manager of technical operations, news, which was my official title, I was the contact person when any affiliate or NBC division needed something in Chicago. Unlike New York and Burbank, where the network serviced the local stations, in Chicago we were the network. We serviced the network. While there were NABIC crews assigned to the Network Bureau, a lot of their support came from us. So I had a lot of contacts, and I just built up IOUs. So I could go to almost any city in the country, and I had the name and the number of somebody to call for help, either personnel or equipment. At the time, and they may still, NBC has a huge warehouse out in Long Island City, Long Island, for all the network equipment, and they were always gracious enough, if I called, to ship stuff. So when the NATO summit was in Chicago, the Secret Service comes in and says you can't do this and you can't do that, and you've got to supply stuff in advance. And so a lot of the stuff we had, but a lot of the stuff we didn't, and it didn't make sense to purchase it. But I picked up the phone and I called my friends in Long Island City, and the next thing you know, a truck drives in full of equipment that we were able to use. It was personal safety equipment. It was radios. It was microwaves, other hardware that we needed to broadcast from all the locations. And the city was preparing for riots. They thought this was going to be again like 1968 with the police battling in the streets. It didn't turn out that way, thank goodness. But we prepared for that, and yeah, Jimmy's right. We got a lot of equipment imported from New York for that one.
You were kind of hitting it right on the head, like preparation, right? And having your crew on tap wherever you need to go at whatever amount of notice that they may need. But at the end of the day, how do you even get from point A to point B with every single thing that is happening, with closures, with rerouting? Like, how do you calculate those additional logistical ways of getting your equipment from one location to another, especially when the bridges are up half the time? I mean, there's so much that goes into what it is that you guys do. I know Raza was talking about the auto show, but I mean, at the end, I'm looking at just the marathon itself.
Well, one of the things I'm thinking of is Ed. She's right. Like when we had to go for NATO, there were roads I didn't even know existed that take us to certain places. Did you know they existed? Were these all new for you guys as well?
Some of those, and some of that's local restrictions. The Secret Service for that event, the Secret Service came in and they set up a bunch of restrictions. We always worked with the Chicago Police Department. They were pretty good about having meetings with the media. They knew we had jobs to do, so they would give us the ground rules, and we'd go back and forth with them until we could get something workable. Okay. A lot of it, like for the NATO summit. We had to have all our gear at McCormick Place a week ahead of time. It all had to be labeled. It all had to be marked. We couldn't run cable. They were going to run cable for us. But we had to have it all there a week ahead of time so the Secret Service could go through it. So as long as you know what the ground rules are, you work with them. You make the best of them. We couldn't. We had a great shot from the roof of NBC Tower of some of the parade routes or some of the traffic routes for this. And the president at one point was staying across the street at the Sheraton. Well, the Secret Service said you can't go on the roof. And we're saying, you know what? It's our building. We're here all the time. If we give you a call and tell you we're going up there, can we do that? And they said, well, as long as we know you're going up there, we won't shoot you. I said, okay. So I had the contact with the woman who was in charge of the Secret Service in Chicago at the time. And we called and said, can we go up to the roof? And she'd say yes or no. And if she said yes, we went up there and we got the shots. If she said no, we made other arrangements.
And that whole weekend, I mean, they weren't kidding around. I had a client, the Associated Press, that week, and they were like, as you're coming in from the western suburbs, can you get a city shot? So I pulled over a little bit off the Eisenhower, and within less than, I'd say, a minute, I had just gotten my tripod out. IDOT comes over, you got to move. So, I mean, they just, like you said, their game was as high as it could be.
Yeah, they were very restrictive, and rightfully so. They had a lot of security concerns that were valid, and they had their job to do, but they understood we had our jobs to do too, and so we worked with them, and pushed and cajoled a little when they were a little too restrictive, but we came to an agreement, and a lot of the time the stations would end up pooling resources. WGN would staff this location, WMAQ would staff that location, WBVM would go somewhere else, WLS would go somewhere else, and would share videos. We did that a lot with helicopters. Every station has a helicopter, but they can only stay up for so long before they have to go to refuel. We had a partnership agreement with WGN at the time because we did not consider WGN a direct competitor. They weren't on with news at 10 p.m. So a lot of times WGN and us would swap helicopters. We would coordinate with them when we were going up, when we were getting low on fuel. They would put their helicopter up and we'd get their signal, and then we'd go refuel. When they were getting low on fuel, we'd come back and we shared the signal that way. And then there was a lot of cooperation among the stations.
Ed, I want to thank you so much for taking time off of your Friday before Labor Day weekend to catch up with this. A lot of people have sent their regards. Roger, Brian Moore. I'm trying to think. I don't want to leave anyone out, but a lot of people had expressed to say hello to you. But a lot of them also wanted me to ask you what you're up to these days. So I want to give you an opportunity. I also involved. Jimmy Mack was telling me a lot in figure skating as well. Please tell us about that world.
Yeah. When my son was growing up, he was a competitive figure skater for about 15 years or so. He competed at all levels, local and national. Never went international, but competed nationally several times. And I would go with him to rinks around the country. You know, my wife and I would go drive him to a rink. And I'm not the kind of person who can just sit there and do nothing. I need something to do. And I got involved as a volunteer with U.S. Figure Skating. So I have been volunteering with them, oh my God, 30 some odd years now, as a scoring. We call them accountants, but we do the scoring. The judges give their marks to each skater, and we calculate the results. At first, it was by hand, then it was by computer, timeshare computer from Honeywell, then laptops, and now it's rinkside with video replay. And I help design and set up this equipment. I'm on part of the software development team for that, and so when there's no COVID, I go around the country volunteering at figure skating competitions. So that's a lot of fun.
Well,
and then
I'm going to give this show a rating. I'm going to give you a rating.
There you go.
Thank
Perfect.
you very much for that. And Sarah, I know you had some pictures as well. Like I said, a lot of people have sent their regards. Walk us through a couple of these pictures, Ed.
The two on the left are reunion pictures. Jim Coglanese, who's a retiree down in Florida, comes back every summer, and we pick a bar in town, and all the retirees get together. So the two on the left are groups of us from two different reunions, and the one on the right is what we call the Last Supper. This was the very last show that I was tech manager for. I had retired at the end of 2013, December 2013, and the company, even though they had 2 years' notice I was leaving, had not found a replacement for me. And they asked if I would stay another 6 months, and I said no, that's not happening. You know, I gave you 2 years' notice. The fact that you couldn't do anything is not my problem. But I did say I would come back for the Chicago Auto Show, which was just 3 weeks after I retired. And by that time, I'd done all the planning for it anyway. So that picture is taken in McCormick Place. That was our setup day at the 2014 Chicago Auto Show, which was, I came back for 3 weeks just to do that show. And then, so the guys treated me to a Last Supper. So that was very nice.
You know what Sarah keeps asking me for, and it's kind of distracting, so I'm going to ask you. The little chimes. The little chimes.
Oh, this was an item that they used to sell in the NBC store, and it doesn't resonate quite as it should.
It's probably that it's not dead on, because I don't want any copyright attorneys coming after me. But I'm glad you did ask about that, because it's interesting. Those chimes are not only significant, like they say certain tastes or smells bring back memory. Those mean a lot to a lot of people, but those actually had technical aspects, right? In the radio days, those would be
in the radio days. They would use the chimes to signal it was the end of a given program. So the affiliates knew the show, knew that broadcast was over, and they could go on to whatever was next. It was also used internally to switch from one control room to another. The NBC had, for a while, had two radio networks, the Red and the Blue Network, and Chicago was one of the primary hubs of the two radio networks. And they, whenever a show was over, they had a rack with switches that would delegate which control room would be current and which was the next control room for every destination, the red network, or the blue network, or local WMAQ or local FM. And they had a very old. We had serial number 1 of a reed vibrator a chimes generator, electronic, a box of about 4 rack units high.
I think
which is now on a shelf somewhere in the Museum of Broadcast Communications here in Chicago.
There. Yeah.
I don't know that they've ever restored it or put it on display, but they have it. And so the on a time basis, the reed vibrators would generate the chimes, and the relays would switch from the old control room to the new control room. It was a very nifty little thing.
Very interesting.
Okay, Ed, one more time just for me. Ding, ding, ding.
Sarah Sadat off camera with a request.
Okay.
I love it. I love it.
Sorry, you made.
I should also note that a lot of my time now is spent with a brand new granddaughter. We have a 15-month-old granddaughter.
Oh, congratulations.
And my wife and I enjoy babysitting her generally twice a week, and it's a lot of fun. So that's been a blessing.
Is she local as well? Pretty close?
Yes. My son and daughter-in-law live here in Park Ridge. They're just 3/4 of a mile from us, so it's very convenient for all concerned. Very
nice. Ed, just one last thing I'm going to ask you is if you could give a little bit of advice to the people coming up in this, in terms of what it takes to make it, in terms of what you've learned, and just a general piece of advice. We'd love for that.
Well, obviously the business has changed a lot over the years, but I think it was as true when I started as it was when I was a manager and hiring people. I'm looking for people who have a good work ethic, who want to be here, who want the job, who want to work, and are willing to put in the effort and show me that they've got a dedication to it. It's this in a lot of ways. Broadcasting is more than just a career; it's a lifestyle. Especially you're working nights, you're working weekends, you're working holidays. I was with NBC over 20 years before I got a weekend off, before I got a holiday off. That's a major commitment, and if you've got to show me as a manager that this is something you're willing to do. When you walk into the office and I'm interviewing you to be a cameraman, I not only want to see what you can shoot and what you can edit, but I want to know about you. I want to know what work ethic you're going to bring into the job, and I think that's the important thing is displaying dedication, and that you want to be there. Life's too short to get stuck in a job that you're not happy with, and just like I found a job, I was shocked when I learned I could get paid to do something I like. And I think I was very lucky to have worked for NBC for 36 years at a job I loved. And sure, it was challenging, it was frustrating, it was tough on family, not being home or working odd hours, but it was a wonderful life, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm thankful for it.
Ed Mann, thank you very much for joining us, for taking time out of your Friday before the Labor Day weekend. We really enjoy this opportunity to talk to you and get your perspective.
Thank you, Raza. This has been wonderful. I've really enjoyed it, and hi to anyone out there who I've worked with. I've seen a couple of people on the comment line, and hi to everyone. I hope you're doing well.
Sounds good. And we want to wrap the show up with that. I'm just going to make a quick announcement. Like you said, the work never ends. There's always something going on. This Sunday, if you're around over this weekend on our other property, Life, Love, and the Grind, 8:20 a.m. Sunday at 3 o'clock, we are bringing the president of the Chicago Headline Club to, again, talk about challenges in the industry and the way the industry is going. So we hope you'll tune in then. As always, Ed, thank you for everything. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for hiring me. And thank you for just being a great guy and a great mentor to myself and a lot of people who you've inspired.
No, well, you're welcome. And thank you.
Awesome. And with that, we'll wrap it. Join us next time. Thank you.